So this is number 7 in our series with discussion starters and messages out of 1 Corinthians. And we're in chapter 5. And it's obvious that Paul has a problem with the church in Corinth because they are allowing a man who is in a relationship, having sexual relations, if you will, with his father's wife. And if it wasn't his mother, obvious it must be a stepmother. And they're not calling him out. And Paul's upset about it, pointing out the fact that even the surrounding community, the pagans, would be uncomfortable with this practice. So why wouldn't the church be uncomfortable? And he goes so far as in verse 5 to say, hand him over to Satan, so the sinful nature may be destroyed and his spirit saved on the day of the Lord. Sounds pretty radical by Paul, but I think what Paul's trying to say in the midst of this is, by handing the fellow outside the congregation, excommunication is what we call it, then that individual has to realize that that's a standard not accepted within the community of faith. He goes on and says, I've written you a letter before about the sexual immorals. We realize that this is not the first letter by that statement that Paul has written before concerning this. And they haven't done anything about it. Now we know that from Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 through 18, that Jesus talked about a time when you actually would have nothing to do with a brother, excommunicate. Jesus doesn't talk about sexual immorality in the midst of that. He's basically talking about relationship, and that there are relationships that are not healed, that you need to exclude that one individual who will not heal in those relationships. That being the case, this discussion starter needs to ask the question, when should the church set someone outside fellowship? And I've always seen Matthew 18 as being that kind of situation where you set someone outside of fellowship so that they know that that way of living is not correct, but you keep in communication, inviting them as if they've never accepted Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior back into the fellowship. And I'd like to raise the thought of sanctuary. As I take this time to record this discussion starter, I'm in our sanctuary at Low Deer Creek. And we have a nice place, a nice sanctuary. It's not real spiffy, but it's nice. What would it feel like if someone came in and ripped up all the pews and tore up the walls and broke all the windows and ripped up the floor? It would feel like we'd been violated. And in one way or another, I think what Paul's trying to nudge us at is when we allow sin inside the church, we're violating sanctuary. We're violating this holy space that we can call people into from the outside to experience Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, to experience healing, to experience hope in the midst of a world that has so much chaos on the outside. He points out that he's not meaning that we judge the world out there, because sexual immorality of all sorts is to be outside the church. It's going to happen because that's the world. But there's a time that we need to judge the church. In other words, discern, measure who's in the church and who's outside the church. Because we need to be that fellowship that is spiritually able to be a sanctuary to call people into for that healing and hope that God so earnestly desires we share with the generation in which we live. It's time we think about, are our doors open? Are we discerning within? And what would Jesus do? Let's think about it.